encourage or allow professors to consult for companies?
Yes. I would say our status probably similar, if not higher.
Oh, that's good. And then how does in our system, we have conflict of commitment. We can only consult one day a week. We're following the NIH practices. And conflict of interest. My office creates so much conflict of interest. And so, but we try as much as possible on the COI committee to enable things and only decide if something really should have a management plan attached to it. For example, the SBIR, STTR awards, Small Business Innovation, Small Business Tech Transfer grants from 16 federal funding agencies go to the companies, and the companies can sub-award some of that money to us. And often it's their first $150,000 into the company. But guess whose lab they're going to sub it to? The lab of the inventor. So we want that to happen, but we need to make sure that when we do the contracts, that person isn't the PI on our deal, and then the person inside the company responsible for everything.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to at least have someone else in the company who would be on the other end of the contract. And we just started a year ago something very controversial because we keep asking companies what they need from us, trying to figure out if we can help them at the next stage. We heard once we leave your incubators or accelerators, or if we didn't get accepted, we can't afford private sector space. Even, or if it's in WeWork, there's no wet lab space there. So we are trying this agreement called the Special User Facility, Shared Special User Facility for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, under which a given professor can can allow access to, say, 4 feet of bench space in the lab at fair market value. So we have about 11 of those situations, and we're managing conflicts. But it's, that's the next thing that we really had to do, and so far no one has gone to jail, including me. That's good. But it is manageable, and we have had shared user facilities on campus that the private sector can use. Under those agreements, though, we'll jointly own the IP. The companies can't pay for access to a piece of equipment or a lab and then solely own what they invent in our space because it's a public institution and they will have used our facilities.
Yeah.
Is this the group that I mentioned, the Skydeck Fund in, have I mentioned it yet? We have the 2 new campus-facing funds that are devoted exclusively to the startup pipeline coming out of UC Berkeley. And both of the first 2 are quasi-philanthropic because they're normal 2 and 20 funds, 2% management fees, 20% carried interest, but they're donating back 10 points. And the experiment there is, will we have enough patience to, when that carried interest is donated back after the close of each fund, kind of under the European waterfall as opposed to the American waterfall, and it goes back just to that incubator. Is that a sustainable model? We'll see how that works. But for the most part, we're still mostly dependent on the angels coming first. And I just met someone from your local angel community, and he said, yeah, there are 600 people in this immediate area who will have the opportunity to evaluate these new startup deals. And that's interesting because I had heard that if we post a description of a technology online, it goes through 7,000 angels that are somehow associated with UC Berkeley overnight, because it's going around the globe. And so that, for the first time, makes sense that it can be mapped out, and this one alone would be 600 people looking at it.
So I'm not sure how related this question will be to your topic, but so I'm from the academic side, and they're kind of research where it's not quite ready to be commercialized or it's not really commercially viable. And so for those kind of research, maybe at Berkeley, do you sort of wait out until it gets more mature, or do you sort of have a special business model, special kind of VCs to actually help support this, and be more lenient about deliverables, timelines, stuff like that?
Yeah. So would this be something that you anticipate you want to do a startup around, or not necessarily?
Maybe.
Yeah. So if you're absolutely sure you want to do the startup and someone will go with the startup, a postdoc or whatever, then there isn't much other than helping people to write their SBIR, STTR grants, just giving them pitch practice, literally putting them in the elevator and say you have 3 minutes to perfect what it is, what problem it solves, what you're going to do, why it's differentiated from other products, and why you should invest.
What if before you get to that stage, you require, say, two or three more research problems, which is pretty unpredictable?
Yeah. Well, we have different lab to market programs, and so it puts one business school student with one PhD student and one person from the private sector, and sometimes one law student. And they generate about, 1,000 hours of market research. And the professor can use it either to write another grant or to see if it's defining what the product could or should be. And then other programs, such as the NSF Innovation I-Core, are focused on customer discovery using the Lean Launchpad methodology of teaching. And the new one, Lean Transfer, based on things that the Tech Transfer Office is patenting. So if we have a disclosure and someone says, I want to do a startup, but it's way in the future, but please hold it in reserve for me, because if you license it to GE, they'll just put it on the back burner. They do have the lab to market programs, and then they have those experiential learning programs that I had on that Pentagon in the innovation ecosystem.
So the first program was at Berkeley, right?
We're the hub of the I-Core for the Bay Area. It's UC Berkeley, UCSF, and Stanford, but it's all NSF funded. NSF keeps asking us to do new things, so we tried the Lean Transfer version of Lean Launchpad last year. And we're also trying to influence the other federal funding agencies, because why should NSF pay for everything? And not everything is in their area.
Are those open for international companies?
Any company can apply to gain entrance to Skydeck, our accelerator. And if you are accepted, you'll get $100,000. You'll get $50,000 for the first 3 months and over a 6-month program, and then the next $50,000 in year 4, or in month 4 through 6. The other thing would be just the relevant club. Like there's a biotechnology club consisting of business school students who came from that industry. And they'll sometimes help refine things, but that they're not doing a real research project. What else? There are external programs not on campus where people can apply, and I think they're commercial accelerators. So the barrier to entrance is going to be higher than ours, where something is just still percolating up, isn't really anything yet. And also they'll want to know who's going to be the CEO. And if you're not going to leave, because almost none of the Berkeley professors leave to start a company. They remain a professor, and they will usually be the chair of the scientific advisory board, but never a C-level officer, unless they want to leave, because it's conflict of commitment of time if they're a C-level officer of the company. Because you have daily managerial duties if you are. Whereas the chair of the scientific advisory board is strategic. I have no idea how many professors don't tell us they are, the CTO, but there are those rules in case we have to use them. But And then there are people in our office who sometimes are just looking for their next gig, and they'll go with a decent startup. Also, the entrepreneur in residence people. There are people who rotate in and out of startups because they want to be their next CFO, and then the EIRs who are just looking for their next opportunity. And they're just running around to the physical incubator spaces to see which company they might want to join, and they're often bringing in seed funding themselves. But the seed funding, I would say, would not be the same as what you would be doing if it were still in your lab. So, but you could leverage what they're giving you with other money. Do you have something similar to the I-Core, Innovation I-Core?
I think there is some nascent work building things like that, but I would not say that there's anything quite at that level. There is a partnership between an organization called T-Cells. Is anybody here from T-Cells? And Autumn, and they do periodic training workshops. Although that's more, well, it's technology commercialization training center. So it's more tech transfer in general, I would say, than I-Core, and you're not required to focus on a specific project.
Yeah.
And then some of the accelerators and incubators do some sort of lean startup type of work. But in terms of the I-Core program, which is fairly project-centric and fairly semi-professional, sort of for grad student level or above, I don't think we have exactly that.
Yeah, well, the way it's situated, though, in the pipeline to incorporation and then maturation and then launch, I still view I-Core and its related programs as being in the transfer area, like the middle part of the funnel.
Yeah.
We were fortunate because the person who envisioned and got it funded at NSF, Errol Arkilich, because he was a program manager at NSF for 10 years, was the godfather and the conceiver of the I-Core program. And he came to Berkeley because he said, I am going to start a venture capital company, M34, and if a given professor has had an NSF grant, and then they go through the I-Core program, and then they go to nationals, which gives them 50,000, and then they go through one more of our programs, entrepreneurship or acceleration, then they will have ticked at least 3 boxes, and I'll guarantee an investment. So he's just there to catch these companies coming through the funnel. And it was smart that the deal flow has to be much larger if you're still going to look at over 100 deals to pick one, and you're only focused on one university. So I'm really grateful to him for his initiative.
Yeah.
But he'll have to be patient. He and his founders. Do you have physical spaces where startups can rent or?
We do. My university rents a building. We call it KX for Knowledge Exchange. And we have startups there. I feel like an ad for my university. Other universities,
Right.
Feel free to talk.
Which university is that?
KMUTT. Yeah, I'm not a very good ad. KMUTT, King Mongkut's University of Technology, Thonburi.
And Nakabang has it too. I'm sorry.
Okay, good, good.
And Chula too. Maybe some
Yeah,
other
I think
places.
so. Yeah. So there's multiple universities are doing that, and we have for our own students, for our own faculty, as well as outsiders. We try to be very open innovation.
Yeah, that's nice. But do you also have gift funding that can ultimately benefit startups? Because in this other question, we do have a donor who selects people who are close to launching a startup but not quite ready. And she'll give 50 to 75,000 to maybe 125,000 just to make sure that that can ultimately pop out of the university. And since it's a gift, it's completely unrestricted funding. But the expectation is that there will be a fund that has co-investment rights in that company, so the campus will benefit, and then we'll also benefit that program so that it can someday be self-sufficient. And she herself, that particular donor and another donor, aren't getting any return at all. They're just philanthropic. They're getting a tax deduction, actually. Yeah.
So, unfortunately, from my perspective, I think the education donation culture in Thailand is different. Part of it's the tax code, part of it's the culture. But there are some donations and there are angels, and we do our best to set people up with those types of people, but we don't have anybody like this. We would love to, but
They donate the money to the temple.
yeah.
Yeah, a lot of.
Interesting. But these angels were entrepreneurs for the most part, and many of them were professors, or still are professors. So it's just the second and third generation of entrepreneurs that are teaching other entrepreneurs and then giving gifts, either directly to the department or to other programs, because they just love to give back and they're generous. But the main thing is that they mentor others. And they also are there just to prove that you're no less of an academic if you are an entrepreneur. I mean, for many years, but not maybe since the mid-90s, people thought, will my colleagues think less of me if I do this startup? Not in an era when you're the last person in the department to start a company. Or, I mean, what's wrong with that? And we now have a provost at Berkeley who's a preeminent chemist and teacher and entrepreneur. These people get promoted all the way up. He's the second to the chancellor right now. And there are just these role models and these examples of success. But then I think some of the other donations are corporate. And they go into these programs. One of the lab to market programs is specifically on clean tech, because the venture capital, traditional venture capital industry has backed away from that. And so it's much more money is needed to bridge the gap. And the person running that was just a former vice president of PG&E. And she knows how hard it is to get a new battery out, or just a new material that is better for an energy efficient building, or some modification to the glass.
Mm-hmm.
And these are very practical things, but often there isn't grant money for that.
Yeah.
So if they do organize a program that combines the PhD students with business school students and or a club, then you have students to do market research. But in that case, there would always be a corporate rep who is part of the team. You can actually read some of the deliverables that they have. Some of the deliverables are proprietary, but still much of the market research is published on the website. That one is called Clean Tech to Market, C2M.
I'll definitely check that out.
But we should have biotech to market, we should have devices to market, we should have
So related to the money questions, so I guess the funding situations here in Thailand and in Silicon Valley are so different. So here's a hypothetical question. So if Berkeley is situated here in Thailand, would you have done anything differently, like in terms of your model, everything about the funding?
We had to do it differently because venture capitalists consider us to be too far away, with an hour-and-a-half drive. And we always say the venture capital investment from Sand Hill Road goes as the square of the distance from Palo Alto. And so they honestly think we're in the boonies. But what has happened, because we had to try harder, also because we don't have a medical school, is that look at all the venture capitalists that have moved to Oakland and to Berkeley. they're coming to the East Bay because their employees can still buy a house.
Houses.
Yeah. It's not that, I mean, it is still expensive, but it's kind of the new hub. And also, many traditional venture capitalists have said, we love the Berkeley entrepreneurs because they're not entitled. They're not all wealthy kids who expect things, and so many are first generation college students. And I can't think of a single startup that doesn't have one extra one foreign founder, not founder, but employee. So the visa situation for us is something that we need to invest in at the university so that the entrepreneurs can stay after they've come for an education and go with these companies. And with the current administration, the current president.
So would you share with us some of the experience that, maybe part of this, the CRISPR-Cas, the development, that, what would be the strategy that the Berkeley will be taking place? I also would like to hear from you when Jay Kiesling founded the Amaris, with that, the spin from the,
Well, with the CRISPR-Cas9, we have, I can't say too much about it, but we have a jointly owned parent patent because one of the co-inventors was in Sweden when she invented, and Sweden doesn't have a Bayh-Dole Act, so the rights vested in her personally and not in the Swedish university. So she licensed her rights to a startup company, and we licensed our rights to another startup company. So while both the licenses are exclusive, there's still, there still is competition from the beginning. I can't say a lot about it because there's so much investment in that portfolio, and it's ongoing. But in the Jay Kiesling case, he said, I can make any kind of isoprene or terpene because it's just, it's chemistry. And he realized that he could also make semisynthetic artemisinic acid, which is a precursor to artemisinin, which is a malaria treatment. But Novartis was already making artemisinin from plants, from Artemisia, from China and Vietnam, and it's also grown in Africa. But because it was botanical source, the worldwide supply is dependent on the previous year's harvest. So he convinced the Gates Foundation to get that large grant. I can do this, and then once you can just scale it up in yeast, just through normal biotechnology processes, yeast fermentation, and then spew it out. So our of us got involved because we had to create a public-private partnership with his startup company, Amaris, with the money, and another company. But we didn't know that at the end of the day, it would be Sanofi-Aventis, the French pharmaceutical company, that would ultimately take it up. We had to design it so that when we did find an enlightened pharmaceutical company that would do this and could do this, they would invest. So we gave 2 exclusive licenses to the Institute for One World Health and Jay Kiesling's startup. He had 5 postdocs that went with the startup. And his field of use was all fields, and the other company was only malaria. So he took this platform technology and then reduced it to practice in a company that has to give away, or has to give a sub-license to Sanofi in a way that Sanofi must sell the product give it away or sell it at cost and not make a profit in low and middle income countries. But Amaris makes money on flavors and fragrances and emollients and biofuels because he used the money to create a platform for just scaling up any isoprene or terpene-based chemical. So it was like a bootstrap philanthropy. That startup got $12 million of the grant, which is so much more than what the typical startup can get, when they just have articles of incorporation. And from the Gates Foundation, which is an unusual source. But we did the agreements in a way that we could show the Gates Foundation, if this works, this would undercut the existing product from Novartis by tenfold. It'll be 25 cents versus $2.50. And they'll invest in almost anything having to do with therapeutics for malaria. That's one of the ones that we have the Euclidean innovation map on to show this is what the university does, this is what the company does, this is the foundation money, and then, by the way, there was federal funding over here. And even years later, Sanofi Aventis got a direct grant from the Gates Foundation because they had a photo activation step that they had to work on, and it was expensive. How are we doing on time?
From the academia as well, and I'm just wondering how do you resolve the conflict of interest in terms of giving consultant, and also the company would like to fund you to develop some sort of a solution for that.
Mm-hmm.
But they wouldn't fund if they don't get the product. But then it's a kind of, we would like it to be not just exclusively for them, but then we got funded for them fully. How would you resolve this kind of situation?
We do allow corporate-sponsored research in the lab of the founder, but corporate-sponsored research has to be academic. Whatever will advance the grad student to their degree, and all published. So they can have a license. We will own the IP rights invented there. We're not going to do the commercial research in the lab. So essentially, the COI committee has about 15 cases every month, and we would look at that one and say, this is what he does as a consultant in the company. This is what he does with federal grants and other funding inside the university. And A is A and B is B. It can't be identical.
What if the solution that they want is not tangible, it's not a product, it's basically it's software.
Mm-hmm.
So they want the software to do the work, but then they give us consultancy as well. It's not something tangible. You don't even know whether other companies would use it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and software anyway is more like a product than anything else immediately. So it's not going to be something that takes 10 years and $1 billion of money to invest in. So often what will happen is that per the author's choice, we will do a Berkeley software distribution open source license on some of the code that will benefit the whole industry. And then we might make proprietary something else that is copyrighted and owned by the university and licensed. But I think it would look very bad if it looked like we turned our lab into a job shop for the company.
Can you comment on valuation?
Yeah, because we think the valuation, the value of IP in a license is the commercial potential of it. And neither does a licensee know when they license. So the license fees across the US are very low, usually less than $50,000, because it's just something, some consideration. And as Kathy said, we'll do well if the company does well and ultimately there's a product for which we will get 3 to 5% running royalty. Or if it's a drug, milestones, huge milestones if they get through clinical trials, things like that.
Is it your standard?
Yes, we have comparables from 111 universities. It's like the real estate comparables. We know roughly what universities get for diagnostics, therapeutics, new materials, and we're trying to lower the barrier to entry to get a license. So we're helping to share the risk by charging low fees. And if it's a startup, we will take about 2 to 5% equity in the company of the first qualified round of financing. So that's also not punitive to the company because they're giving much more than that to their employees. And some companies can pay almost nothing when they need a license from us because they haven't raised money yet. We will get pro rata or co-investment rights, though, in those stock purchase agreements. so that we could, if we wanted to, participate in 10% of every round of financing. However, we've never had a chief investment officer at UC who spends the time to look at all these companies to see which rights will be exercised. So another venture capital company has that right, and they'll exercise it, rarely. We could, if we wanted to, also exercise that right to keep ourselves less diluted in terms of the amount of equity that we take.
So you don't spend hours and hours trying to figure out what we should charge?
No,
this big company versus this small company?
We rely on comparables. It has taken many, many, many years to come up with a really big database of global comparables. But universities are motivated to do that. And they still fall in very narrow ranges. If something isn't going to is going to be obsolete in 2 years, like software, because someone can design around, we might just have only an upfront fee, and then the valuation is harder. But and it's also just whatever you can negotiate. And we don't want either the inventors to feel it was unfair or the public to read, that Genentech got something for nothing.
Just a point of PR, I think, for Thai universities. I don't think there's a Thai database of comparables in Thai universities, but Thai universities, if they can contribute their own license information to Autumn, can have access to the Autumn database, which is not an answer to the Thai market, but it is some data to start with.
I don't rely on that one.
You're better off with your own.
Well, and it proves the point that they're not very variant across the U.S. and Canada. And it might be because of this philosophy where you just give them an incentive. When they have no money, they can't pay more than $10,000 or $5,000 or $2,000, and they're happy to give you equity. By the way, we do take equity when companies need to use some of our incubator space, such as the hard tech space, because they can't afford a 3D printer or something to print a house out of concrete. So there creates a challenge if we're taking 2% when they need our physical spaces, and we take some equity because of this new program, and then the licensing office later next year is trying to get 3 to 5%. They will say it's too many bites at the apple. So I do think we should be holistically managing all of these equity holdings across campus so that we're not competing with each other.
So right now it's done by separate offices, like if somebody's incubating?
Yeah. We have been able for 2 years now to take equity in exchange in partial lieu of rent. And our office doesn't manage all of those spaces. I have 1 minute left. But I've had 1 minute left for 5 minutes.
Any last question? Let me rotate.
Ask if you choose one criteria as the first number one from the statistical perspective, what criteria can you study to inspire you say yes? For
You could choose one what?
A criteria or
Criterion?
or standard for entrepreneurship team, because I do experience them a lot of team, and some of them do. They have a vision, very visionary. But I mean visionary. It's like they are so strong with their belief, and some of them they say, whatever you invest us or not, this must be done in a few years. And what the criteria?
Yeah. Also, I mean, not in addition to the passion and drive and dedication and risk-taking, sometimes the founders from academia are the most resistant to pivoting the company to what they should pivot to next. And that's why we have so many programs to teach them what they should pivot to. And it's just, it doesn't, sometimes doesn't translate, you know, when you're an academic competing with others for grant money, and then some academics also don't work well in teams in companies. It's just not, they're not very collaborative. And so it's, I think, willingness to listen, especially listen to your first funders. Often the people who give you the seed funding, they're angel investors who are former entrepreneurs. They're giving back, and it's called smart money. You know, they're going to babysit their investment by mentoring the entrepreneurs, and so people should listen to them.
Yes, like their team building, or expertise, or there's a passion.
Yeah, and because later, when they do get big money from venture, if they're still acting that way, they're going to be out, because the board will get them out, or they won't get the money if the private capital provider sees that they are the problem.
So it's about the team management, number one.
Collaboration, yeah, listening.
We have to move, so thank you very much.
Thank you. To start, help new campus-facing funds that are funded specifically to capitalize startups coming out of UC Berkeley labs. And the reason is that it's just not possible for venture capital firms on Sand Hill Road or anywhere that's more than an hour drive away to be visiting each of these companies, or to come to all of the pitch competitions and hear who's presenting. So we help them. And the two that exist now that are focused solely on Berkeley are organized as traditional 2 and 20 funds, 2% management fee, 20% carried interest, but they're donating half of the carried interest back to the campus. In the case of the Chemistry Catalyst Fund, even though they're not limited to chemistry startups, they're donating back to the chemistry dean, because venture capitalists came from labs in chemistry. So I was impressed that they were able to organize in that way. And they did it with the help of the Berkeley Foundation, which is the organization that always is responsible for bringing in gifts. So the beauty of this new structure is that while the funds are professionally managed and they're not UC Berkeley, they're outside, the Berkeley Foundation can ask its tens of thousands of alumni if they want to help in this area. They can give a gift to Berkeley, have a thank you letter and a tax deduction, but they